this is going to be an interesting life, but I'm not sure it's going to be a nice life. And I have a lot of empathy for you and your family. But let me begin with the issue of encryption. I've long been a proponent of strong encryption technology. Such technology is essential to protecting consumers' privacy and keeping America's tech sector at the forefront of global innovation. As the chairman of the Senate Republican High-Tech Task Force, I've had conversations with a number of tech leaders, such as Apple's Tim Cook, just to mention one, on the importance of encryption. Proposals to mandate so-called backdoors into encrypted devices are not the answer, in my opinion. I have tremendous respect for former Director Comey, but in candor, this is an issue that I don't think he got quite right. What we need, in my view, is a public-private partnership in which Congress, law enforcement, and industry stakeholders work together to find the path forward. Now, Mr. Wray, will you commit to work with Congress and with industry stakeholders in a collaborative manner on the issue so that we can find a solution that is workable for all sides?
Senator, I know that this is an issue that's been very important to you for a long time, and we discussed it in our meeting. As we discussed then, I think this is one of the most difficult issues facing the country. There's a balance, obviously, that has to be struck between the importance of encryption, which I think we can all respect when there's so many threats to our systems, and the importance of giving law enforcement the tools that they lawfully need to keep us all safe. And so I don't know, sitting here today as an outsider and a nominee before this committee, what the solution is, but I do know that we have to find a solution. And my experience in trying to find solutions is that it's more productive for people to work together than to be pointing fingers, blaming each other. And that's the approach I've tried to take to almost every problem I've tackled, and that's the approach I would want to take here in working with this committee, with the private sector. One advantage, having been in the private sector for a little while, is that I think I know how to talk to the private sector, and I would look for ways to try to see if I could get the private sector more on board to understand why this issue is so important to keeping us all safe.
That's all I can ask for. I'd like to turn now to the issue of child predators and what we can do to protect our loved ones from harm. I recently joined with Senator Franken to introduce the Bipartisan Child Protection Improvements Act, which would provide access to FBI background checks to youth-serving organizations to ensure that child predators are not able to obtain employment with such organizations. Now, the bill passed the House of Representatives earlier this year, and I want to thank the FBI for providing very constructive support and technical assistance on this important bill. Will you commit to continue working with Congress to ensure that youth-serving organizations have access to FBI background checks for their employees and volunteers?
Senator, I know this is an important issue. It's one that you raised and that Senator Franken also raised, and I can commit that it's something I'm very interested in trying to figure out a way to support those efforts and work with both of you and others on. The child exploitation and obscenity section was in the criminal division when I oversaw it and brought some of the most important cases, so I'm keenly aware on a personal level of the threat that predators face to the most vulnerable populations in this country, and I want to work with everybody to try to find better solutions.
Well, thank you. We'll work together. Your agency has strongly supported my rapid DNA legislation, which passed the Senate earlier this year in May. Current law restricts access to the FBI's Combined DNA Index System, or CODIS, to DNA records generated at an accredited crime lab. Recent developments in rapid DNA technology, however, offers a great promise in speeding up the timetable for DNA analysis. Using rapid DNA technology, a law enforcement officer can know within 2 hours whether an individual is wanted for an outstanding crime or has a connection to evidence from a crime scene. Now, my bill expands access to CODIS to DNA records generated through rapid DNA instruments. It will help law enforcement more quickly solve crime and exonerate the innocent. Now, I'd like you to commit, if you can, to continue the FBI's long-standing tradition of working with Congress to improve the way DNA analysis is used in our criminal justice system, and to reduce inefficiencies and backlogs in DNA sample analysis. Will you help us on that?
Senator, I would look very much forward to working with you and others on the committee on this important issue. I'm not up to speed on the latest advances in DNA technology, but even when I served in law enforcement before, it was already clear what a valuable tool it is, both to ensure that the right people are caught and prosecuted, but also to make sure that the wrong people aren't unfairly accused. And it strikes me as just good sense law enforcement to try to come up with a way to make that tool more readily available and more rapidly available.
Thank you. In 2015, the FBI investigated Secretary Clinton's unclassified server system and determined that 81 email chains contained classified information ranging from confidential to top secret special access program levels at the time they were sent. As someone who served 20 years in the Senate Intelligence Committee, longer than any other member of the Senate has ever served, I have deep respect for the Intelligence Committee and for the need to protect and properly handle classified information. I was very troubled by the fact that Secretary Clinton was so careless about how she handled classified communications when she was Secretary of State. What is your perspective on how the FBI should handle cases in the future when individuals do not properly handle classified documents and information?
Well, Senator, this is an issue that's very important to me. In my prior government service, because the counterespionage section had jurisdiction over those kinds of investigations, and they reported up to me, we investigated a number of cases involving unauthorized and inappropriate disclosure of classified information. One of the real eye-opening things for me coming into the leadership of the department from having been a line prosecutor was just how much of our sources and methods come from our overseas partners. I just think most Americans, rightly, but have no idea just how important that is. And if we can't protect classified information, it's not just that information that gets jeopardized, which can lead to risk to lives of intelligence community personnel and all sorts of other compromising situations. But even more importantly, it causes our allies to lose confidence in us and their willingness to share information with us. And if that dries up, we're in a world of hurt. So I think those things need to be treated very severely and investigated very aggressively.
Well, thank you. I'm very concerned about the violent crime trends that we're seeing throughout the United States. According to the FBI's 2015 statistics, violent crimes increased in our country by nearly 4% over the year before, and murders increased by nearly 11%. Can you explain to us what you will do as FBI director to work with state and local partners to curb this disturbing trend in violent crime?
Well, Senator, as Senator Nunn mentioned in his introduction, dealing with the scourge of violent crime, in particular gun violence, is a subject that I've spent a lot of time on in my prior law enforcement service. I think the FBI has a lot on its plate, but it needs to look for the ways that it can contribute. Obviously, ATF and, as you mentioned, state and local partners are essential to that effort. And I think the approach should be for the FBI to see what it can do where it uniquely provides value. To me, that might be things like organized gang activity, MS-13, places where the FBI has particular expertise that it can support and supplement and augment and complement the efforts of ATF, state and local law enforcement. But so it needs to be the old saying about the whole being greater than the sum of the parts kind of approach, and that's the approach I would take.
Well, thank you. I think that's a good approach, and I just want to thank you for being willing to serve and to take on this awesome responsibility. And I want to thank your family for being willing to sacrifice themselves, because we know that many times you're going to be away from the family and working pretty doggone hard. So thank you for your willingness to serve, and I intend to fully support you, and I hope everybody on this committee and in the Senate will do likewise.
Thank you, Senator. It means a lot.
Senator Leahy. Thank you. It's good to see you again, Mr. Wray. Thank you for coming by yesterday, and welcome back to the committee. Senator Nunn mentioned Griffin Bell, and I enjoyed our talk about Judge Bell. Now, I wish you were here under different circumstances because I'm troubled by the abrupt firing of predecessor Director Comey. The president or the White House initially misled the public about why Director Comey was fired. Then the president made his motivation very clear in an interview with NBC News. He said he fired Director Comey because of the Russian thing. Of course, the Russian thing was the FBI's investigation into potential collusion between the Kremlin and the president's campaign and administration. Now there are multiple investigations about Russia, and their interference is similar interference we see in other countries by Russia. Just yesterday we learned that a number of members of the Trump campaign were eager to work and talk with members of the Russian organization, even though they're an adversary of ours, about the campaign. I talk about this not so much in history, although we need to know exactly what happened, because we got to make sure it doesn't happen again. I don't care if they're helping a Republican or a Democrat. No country, especially an enemy like Russia, should be able to interfere with our country. Now, the FBI is one of the most powerful tools available to the president, and from what we see from the White House, they may be expecting your loyalty, just as the president did with Director Comey. Now, you told me yesterday there's been no question by anybody in the White House asking you for a pledge of loyalty. Is that correct?
That's correct, Senator. My loyalty is to the Constitution, to the rule of law, and to the mission of the FBI. And no one asked me for any kind of loyalty oath at any point during this process, and I sure as heck didn't offer one.
And I also assume from what you told me yesterday, you would not give one if asked.
Correct.
Correct. And the reason I asked this, I remember when then Senator Jeff Sessions asked a great length, he's questioning Sally Yates at her nomination hearing. And he said, if the views the president wants to execute are unlawful, should the Attorney General, the Deputy Attorney General say no? Now, you served with Sally Yates, and you can imagine, and probably not surprised, her answer was she'd say no. She stayed true to her word. Of course, as soon as she said no, when she refused to defend President Trump's discriminatory Muslim ban, she got fired. Now, so I'm going to ask you the same question that Jeff Sessions asked of Sally Yates, and she kept her word and, of course, got fired for it. If the president asks you to do something unlawful or unethical, what do you say?
First, I would try to talk him out of it, and if that failed, I would resign.
Thank you. Why did the president fire Director Comey?
Senator, I don't know. I'm not familiar with all of the information that the president may or may not have had, so I'm really not in a position to speak to that. I do know there's a special counsel investigation now underway with my former colleague, Director Mueller, leading that, and I think that issue falls within his investigation.
Well, of course, former Director Mueller is looking at whether crimes took place. What I worry about when the president said, and I quote him, faced great pressure because of Russia, close quote, and that pressure was, quote, taken off, close quote, by firing Director Comey. Does that explanation trouble you?
Well, Senator, I really don't know all the circumstances surrounding that statement and the context. I can tell you that during my time at the department working with then Deputy Attorney General Comey, uh, 12 years ago, and before that. In all my dealings with Jim Comey, he was a terrific lawyer, a dedicated public servant, and a wonderful colleague. I haven't been in touch with him in a number of years, but
will you work and actually pledge to keep the FBI from any political interference or influence?
absolutely, Senator.
I was a prosecutor at the time of J. Edgar Hoover. I never wanted to see us go back to that era either. The FBI director did things that we now know are illegal, improper, and done for his own political motivation. And I know Senator Grassley made some comment about that too. The intelligence community, and this has now been public, including the FBI, the CIA, and NSA, concluded with high confidence that Russia intervened in the 2016 election in order to denigrate Secretary Clinton and help elect Donald Trump. Do you have any doubt that Russia interfered with our elections, hoping to elect Trump?
Senator, the only thing I've been able to review on that at the moment is the public form of the intelligence community's assessment, the summary. So I don't have access to all the classified information, but I will tell you that from what I reviewed, I have no reason whatsoever to doubt the assessment of the intelligence community.
Will you read the classified sections if you're confirmed?
It'd definitely be one of the first things I'd want to see.
Thank you, because you see the actions of Russia in Europe and in a number of other parts around the world trying to expand their influence. You see them wanting to influence other people's elections. The last thing in the world we want them to be able to do is interfere with ours. I don't want any other country to, but especially a country that is as adversarial to the interests of the United States as Russia. Now, during a Federalist Society event on originalism and criminal procedures in 2005, you discussed the extent to which foreigners were protected by the Fourth Amendment while on American soil. You brought the case of U.S. versus Verdugo Urcadius, in which the Supreme Court held that a citizen and resident of Mexico who was transported to and incarcerated in the United States was not protected by the Fourth Amendment because he was not a member of the people. You then stated you think that might be a good way of handling undocumented aliens. Oh, to what extent do you believe Fourth Amendment protections against unreasonable search and seizure apply to undocumented aliens in the United States?
Well, Senator, I haven't studied the Fourth Amendment jurisprudence on this topic in a long time.
Talk about
it. At the time, my recollection was that I was speaking, the conference was about originalism, and I think the main thrust of my remarks was about how those who criticize originalism in the context of criminal constitutional jurisprudence need to come up with an explanation for what, if not originalism, then what. And I was trying to make the point that there's some logic to looking at originalism in that context. But I haven't looked at those remarks or that issue in a long time.
Do you think, as FBI director, that undocumented aliens in the United States have any protection whatsoever, or could an FBI agent just go and break in buildings any way they want and search for anything they want?
Well, no, Senator. I think we need to be mindful of the civil liberties of all.
Thank you. Do you agree that waterboarding is torture and is illegal?
Yes.
Thank you. That certainly was the same answer there.
I'm sorry?
That's the same answer Director Comey gave when I asked him that same question. I've worked for years with Chairman Grassley to address the concerns the two of us have related. There are things we do on a bipartisan basis on this committee, and Senator Grassley and I have been concerned about the FBI's flawed hair and fiber analysis testimony. I asked Director Comey a question in May. He promised me a follow-up. What are we doing going over the 3,000 cases that were closed because of faulty analyses by the FBI? those cases come up, even if there's a missing transcript, will you commit to having an agent conduct in-person visit to determine whether documents are necessary to find out what happened? I say this because I remember as a prosecutor using the FBI's hair and fiber analyses that if we've had people convicted because they were faulty, we should know that.
Well, Senator, I share your concern about having forensic science done appropriately. Cases stand or fall on that, and we can't have innocent people convicted because of flawed science. I'm not familiar with the particular problems that occurred in this particular arena, but it's something I'd want to get briefed on early on and see what other appropriate action might need to be taken.
Thank you. Mr. Chairman, I'll have a follow-up question for him, partly about the questions raised of former Mayor Giuliani's influence with the FBI during some of these investigations and others. And I'd ask your commitment, if you're confirmed, to respond to those questions. Will you respond to them?
Absolutely, Senator. I look forward to being responsive to the members of this committee in whatever way is appropriate.
I didn't mean to interrupt his answer. I'm sorry. Senator Graham.
Thank you, Mr. Wray. I think you've been